This is part 2 of the invertebrates review for exam 3. And we had left off with all the characteristics that the phylum Cnidaria have in common. Now we're going to move on. We're in the phylum Cnidaria still. We're going to cover or review some of the important facts from the 4 different classes within the phylum. So we'll begin with class Anthozoa. What you need to remember about the Anthozoa is, well, first of all, the 3 primary examples within the Anthozoa are the sea anemones. And then we have animals called sea pens. You've never seen one, you just have to Google an image of those because they're not as common as the sea anemones. But the other animal is a coral. The same animals that form the coral reefs from the material left behind when they die. Their shell, basically. Okay, so a lot of bright colors. A lot of these are found in the tropics. In fact, the sea anemones and the sea pens are found within coral reefs. So they're all found together. A lot of times they like similar conditions, which would be warm, tropical conditions. So there's some interesting things about the life cycle of the Anthozoa. And we talked about that Cnidaria can take on the polyp or the medusa body form, but Anthozoa only take on the polyp form. There are no medusas in the class Anthozoa. Only the polyp form. Okay, now they carry out reproduction both asexually and sexually. So they reproduce asexually by a process called budding. If you don't remember what that is, make sure you look it up. And they can reproduce sexually by releasing male and female gametes, egg and sperm, from either the same polyp or 2 different polyps. From the same polyp or 2 different polyps. In other words, they are not always, but they can be hermaphrodites. But what happens when the sperm meets the egg is it forms a larva called a planula larva. And I know one of the quiz questions asks you about that. The Anthozoa are not the only ones that form planula larvae, but when they do reproduce sexually, they start out with a polyp that produces either 1 or 2 polyps that release gametes. The gametes fuse and form the planula larva, which grows into a polyp body form. So, and attaches to a substrate and is sessile. All right, that's the Anthozoa. Let's move on to the Scyphozoa. Which is going to include really just the jellyfish, all different types of jellyfish, true jellyfish, which of course we recognize mostly by the medusa body form. But most jellyfish do have a stage in their life cycle where they are in the polyp body form. And the polyp body form can reproduce by budding. and then the medusa can reproduce asexually. Not the polyp, but the medusa can reproduce asexually and form a planula larva, which grows into a polyp and then into the adult medusa. So the life cycle can work one of two ways. The life cycle can be just a polyp that reproduces by budding. So that would be the asexual form of their life cycle. Polyp reproduces by budding. But the medusa can reproduce sexually and asexually. I'm sorry, I had to look up what I just said. I had on my notes, I had written down that the medusa body form of the jellyfish reproduce asexually, and that doesn't make any sense because the medusa is typically the sexual form of any of the cnidaria. But the medusa life cycle basically is like this. The medusa will produce gametes, and that, of course, is egg and sperm. And the gametes will combine and develop into a planula larva, much like the anthozoa. The difference is the planula larva then matures into it's like an immature medusa. It's called an ephyra, but that matures into a medusa. So the planula larva matures into a polyp, and that polyp matures more into an ephyra, which finally becomes the adult medusa jellyfish, that we think of. Let's see, what else about jellyfish? Nothing. All right, the next class is the cubozoa. We'll do blue. These are typically very small. The largest ones are 25 centimeters large. Which, there are jellyfish smaller than that, but the cubozoa can also be just a few centimeters. So they can be very, very small. They're box-shaped. So we call them the box jellies or box jellyfish because they are cube-shaped, look like a box. In the life cycle of the cubozoans, the medusa undergoes sexual reproduction. In other words, the gametes fuse, the egg and the sperm fuse, and form into a planula larva. This is the third class where we've seen this, except for of course, the anthozoa, which don't have a medusa stage. And then, just like the scyphozoa, they form into a polyp and then a mature adult medusa. The medusa body form is different in the cubozoa and the scyphozoa. So the jellyfish and the box jellyfish do have some differences in their medusa body form. The other thing we remember about cubozoa is how toxic they are. Some cubozoans are the most toxic of all cnidarians, including Portuguese man-of-war. And they can be deadly to humans. All right, and then we have the class Hydrozoa. I'm running out of paper. The class Hydrozoa. Which is an interesting class because this is the one group of cnidarians that live as colonies, that can live as colonies. So with the Hydrozoa, we can have the organism we know as the Hydra, which takes on primarily a polyp body form as an adult. It does have the polyp body form as an adult. And it's freshwater. And then we also have colonial Hydrozoa, so a lot of polyps, hundreds of polyps that live in colonies. There's a group called we call it an organism, but it's really a colony of organisms called Abelia. And then there's another one that we call the Portuguese man of war, or man-o'-war. But they are both examples of the Hydrozoa. The polyp is the dominant stage, and of course, but unlike the Anthozoa, they do have the Medusa body form at some stages of their life cycle. Okay. Then I wanted to go over one species of Portuguese man-of-war called Physalia. That's the genus name anyway. Physalia is a species of the Portuguese man-of-war, and it is just like all Portuguese man-of-war, it's a free-floating colony of polyps. And I know and there are like different types of polyps. They have different names and things like that. There's like 4 different types of polyps. Now we're going to move on. This will be number 3 in our notes, to a superphylum. And it's a superphylum because it's a group of other phyla of invertebrates. But this superphylum is called the Lophotrochozoans. And all of the phyla that are within the superphylum Lophotrochozoans are the phylum Platyhelminthes. I'm going to write them down first. The phylum Rotifera, the rotifers. The phylum Nemertea, our ribbon worms. The phylum Mollusca. And what these have in the Lophotrochozoans have in common is they either form a lophophore or a trochophore, and those are in different stages of the life cycle of these organisms. And the key for this group is that unlike the ecdysozoans, which is the other group of invertebrates, they do not shed their cuticle. They don't have a cuticle that they shed periodically. So the last phylum is the Annelida. This would be the earthworms, the segmented worms. All right, so I just want to give you a few notes on that I saw, that I noticed whenever we went over the quiz. The phylum Platyhelminthes does include planaria, which are harmless, and it also includes the endoparasites. That means these are parasites that live inside the body of the host, the flukes and the tapeworms. But they also include an ectoparasite that lives on the outside of fishes, sometimes on their gills.